July 28th, 2023. The Miami Marlins sit at 55-48. My name is Azout. Welcome to Fish Unfiltered. As your host, I always have Kevin Barral with me, and we're welcoming a very special guest. He spent 20 years on the Marlins beat, 40 years as a professional journalist, Mr. Joe Frisaro. Joe, thank you so much for taking the time. How are you, sir?
Doing great, guys. Thanks for having me. This fun times right now.
Yeah, you're making your return, your second time on Unfiltered. And I guess we can start with just the 2023 season. You and I spent a lot of time together on spring training, and I don't think we had as much hope for this ball club entering the year. They didn't do much on the offensive end or on the starting pitching end, but look at them. 7 games over in late July. What went on? What went right?
Well, what went right was Luis Arias was hitting 500 the first month and 400 pretty much ever since. Jorge Soler provided power. And even though Sandy was faltering, other starting pitchers stepped up. And I don't think the bullpen gets enough credit for really stepping up and logging a lot of innings. And I think what went right was when the Marlins were getting hot early, the ones everyone thought were going to just run away with it, all were terrible. The Mets are terrible. You know, the Phillies got off to a bad start, but they're kind of corrected it. And, then you look at, the Cardinals are terrible. San Diego Padres are terrible. All these teams that in spring training, the Cardinals were supposed to run away with the Central. So I think a lot of credit we'll give to Skip Schumacher for instilling, a confidence that go out, play hard, see what we can do. But I don't think anyone can really underestimate what Luis Arias has done for this team when you're on base, half the time, or more. And, just being this table setter. And then all of a sudden, you seize on that and you find yourself in a really good spot at the All-Star break. And you built a cushion. So even though you stumbled out of the gate in the second half, you still are in a pretty decent spot because nobody else has seized the moment either. So I think the Marlins have I also think the Marlins have figured out the new rules a little bit better than some of these other teams, meaning their style of play. I mean, I don't know. Yes, Sandy deserves all the credit for the complete game the other day, but that was a 2-1 game. And Garrett Hampson was only in the game because Jesus Sanchez I hope he's fine, but, he had this incident at first base. And as soon as the Rays get momentum, Hampson drops this perfect bunt, and it does two things. He beats it out, and he busts up Zach Eflin's knee. So they lose Eflin. He has a bad inning. Now it's a 5-1 game, and the Marlins are riding high. Eflin's out of the game. That was maybe a crippling game for the Rays, who are going the other way right now. And just little things like that they do better than other teams. I watch a lot. I watch like 5 games a day. And I watch these other teams in a similar situation, a leadoff double down a run with their version of Garrett Hampson up. And that guy strikes out with 3, home run swings instead of getting the guy to third and trying to tie the game and play it that way. And I think that Skip is playing the game to the personnel he has, because nothing really adds up for this when you're Cy Young Award winner last year. Granted, he pitched very well yesterday, but has had a down year. And some of the guys you're counting on the middle of your lineup didn't necessarily come through. And meanwhile, you're right there. So the other day against Tampa, the bottom of the order saved the day. Jacob Stallings, who everyone writes off, he had a couple of big hits and helped win the game. And my guy John Birdie just figures out how to do things to win ball games. The problem with John Birdie is the problem with a lot of the players like Joey Wendell. They're more role players, so the more they're on the field, the more exposed. But you put them in that 3-day-a-week start, they can be very effective players for you.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? Like you said, they added some wins in the first half of the season. And because of that, they do sit pretty. 7 games over 500, 4 days to go, 5 days to go until the Major League Baseball trade deadline. Last night, we were all surprised, not too surprised, I guess, that they added a reliever. But hey, David Robertson, arguably the best reliever available on the market, was traded to Miami for 2 high upside prospects in Ronald Hernandez and Marco Vargas. In my opinion, steep price for just 2 months of Robertson, but it had to be done. I'm 100% behind this because you know what? That really solidifies the ninth inning for this team that has had some struggles with that inning the last few weeks. Joe, what were your initial reactions to this swap?
Oh, I see no downside. And yeah, so I'll take your word for it how good these prospects are, but this is win now. This is win now. You can worry about an 18-year-old prospect. You could go sign another international signing and develop him. Because a lot of times with those prospects, it's not just ability, it's development and what's your system doing. But this was a must trade for Kim Ang and the front office because, as I alluded to in my preamble, is the players and the coaching staff did their part to put themselves. If they did nothing, then and just say ride it out or make a rental that is really not that good of an impact guy, you would demoralize your clubhouse, especially since the Phillies are probably they have something up their sleeve because Dave Dombrowski always does. And some of these other potential contenders, you needed to do this. And I love it. I just wish they would have done it a little earlier. That would be my knock on what they're doing. But this is now, forget what we thought or, was this team overperforming? Is this sustainable? It doesn't even matter anymore because we're dealing with today. Today, they're 7 over and really just a half game out, whatever, for a wild card spot. You got to go for it. And if you don't, then what was this about? Right. It was like you basically gave Skip an edict to have the mantra, do everything you can to win today. Win today, win today, win the day. And, I've seen too many teams worry about next year, 2 years later, this guy after that. No, this is the now because it's been 20 years. Let's be honest. It's been 20 years since they've had a shot like this. Yes, okay. In a few years back, they were I think it was 16. They might have been 9 over on August 1st. And then they really it all kind of fell apart. And we know what happened to Jose at the end of that season. I believe Stanton got hurt in August. So you're still, they're not out of the woods. But this was a sign that, now your bullpen, you put people in roles. And keep this in mind too, guys. This team is built to play close games. Yeah. So if you're going to go to the playoffs, you need more than one closer. Well, right now they have 3, if you think about it, counting, Tanner Scott and AJ and David, so you got 3 guys that can that you feel comfortable with pitching the 9th, or if you're in extra innings, 9th and 10th.
Right.
And you needed to make this move, even though we all know they need hitting. That's obvious, but they needed pitching mainly because their pitching is on fumes. So this will get guys their second win. This will put guys in better roles. And even if they don't do anything else, this is a significant move for them. If they don't do anything else, then they're banking on Jazz and Garcia or whoever to come off the IL and provide just enough and hope Sandy's the innings eater and then run it to the end. But this is a very significant move. And it also takes the Mets off the board because there was a time I thought the Mets could make up 6 games coming out of the break or 7 games. Not now. They're basically out of it. So you take the Mets out of the picture, and David Robertson doesn't go to one of the teams you're fighting for a wild card spot with.
Right.
So this is a very significant move, and hats off. I don't really see any downside to it.
Mr.
On
Kevin,
top of that, I mean, yeah, you bring in a guy who not only could lock down 9th for you, but someone who's done that at the highest point of baseball in the World Series. He won with an 09 with the Yankees. He was with the Phillies, and he's not, very. He knows, he's very familiar with the NL East. He's pitched with the Mets and the Phillies, and he's done it at very high stages. So I really love the move. I obviously the prospects that they gave up, I was a big fan of. Both Ronald, switch hitting guy. He was playing very well in the FCL, and then you have Marco Vargas, who, when we were doing the top 30 list for Fish on First, we were expecting him to be the best the top position player in our list come end of season. So that's how we thought of them. And obviously the Mets get a great return, in my opinion. And I think Robertson's a great piece to add. You now give, you could kind of put Puck in the 7th or 8th if need be. And then you could put Robertson in the 9th, someone who's done this, as you've seen the World Series. So I really like the move. He also has the cutter, so he could kind of help out. I know Jesus Luzardo now throwing the cutter a little bit more. I believe it's Puck as well who throws the cutter. Or yeah, so kind of get a nice mentor in there. And on top of that, you get Andrew Nardi coming back very soon, probably on Monday. So you add another reliever there. So not only kind of cool addition there via the injuries. So Miami's bullpen may be probably the best in the National League East right now. How I look at it, Atlanta obviously they added their own pieces, but I mean Miami got the best reliever on the market if Josh Hader is not dealt at deadline. So I love this move. I love it.
Yeah. There's a lot to like, and you mentioned a good point, Kevin, and this can't be taken too lightly. David Robertson's performed in New York. He's performed with pressure in a pressure environment. There's a lot to be said about closers that close in meaningful and winning seasons compared to some other rentals who you don't know. You don't know if a guy in a smaller market or hasn't really been tested may have numbers. But so again, a couple of weeks ago, I think I tweeted something about, they needed a reliever. I thought they needed to get another closer. For what I kind of stated is when you're going to be playing as many close and meaningful games, you need your bullpen. Your bullpen, and yes, they have a ton of needs, but they need the bullpen to be as strong as they can for any shot to reach the postseason and advance in the postseason.
Yeah, and like Kevin mentioned, sometimes the best additions are the internal ones. Like you mentioned, Andrew Nardi coming off the AL, but another addition that was, from the outside was Jorge López from the Minnesota Twins. Another trade with the Minnesota Twins. This time, Dylan Floro goes the other way. Dylan Floro ended up spending 3 pretty solid seasons with Miami. Kimming, acquired player for another one. Joe, what were your thoughts on another Lopez coming to Miami from the Twins?
Well, this is an interesting baseball trade because make no mistake, David Robertson cushions this because Dylan Floro is pretty dependable.
Yeah. Taking
the ball under anything, if he had a bad outing, which all relievers do, you got the most out of him, and he's very dependable and was used a lot. Lopez has upside. The interesting thing is if you had kept Floro, and let's say August doesn't go too well for the Marlins and you fall out of it, it just kind of falls apart, but you were banking on Floro and now you fall out of it in the final 2 months, you were going to lose Floro. I'm sure they were thinking if they were sellers, then Dylan Floro was going to be moved at the trade deadline, because he's heading free agency. So, he's on an expiring contract. So it was interesting the way they did this to get a year of control in Lopez, a guy with, he's got a good like power sinker type guy, which plays at Lone Depot. So that's good. So that was an interesting baseball trade. You saved a little bit of money there, but you took on the rest of David Robertson's salary. So you didn't, you've taken a credit to Bruce Sherman. He's taking on money right now. So I like this a lot. The way they did their bullpen, boom, like you said, if he's arguably the best, closer who was out there. And I still am not convinced San Diego's going to deal. Maybe they are. Obviously, if they move Soto, they will be. But, it's like these are very good moves. Those both moves were good. But, you mentioned Nardi. Nardi pitched almost every game. He was completely, I'm hopeful he comes back and mirrors. But a lot of these younger guys who have been leaned on heavily and they're coming back from injury, I look at them as kind of icing on the cake. Not, hopefully he's fine. But I'm not just thinking, you just plug and play like you did the first half when he would go every day he was up, it seemed like. Because, the guy's dealing with, now you're dealing with his future. He's in uncharted waters and innings and all that other stuff. So I think you got to be a little more guarded with Andrew Nardi and just hope that, you could get quality innings down the stretch. If he gives you more than that, great. But I'm more fingers crossed that he holds up than celebrating, oh my gosh, we got, yet another wipeout lefty type guy.
The interesting thing about the trade with Lopez, I mean, I was trying to look like I was looking through stats, I was looking through the splits. Like, is there something this guy has done this season that kind of made Miami make the trade? And really, to be honest with you, there really wasn't, because you look at ERA, you look at FIP. The FIP is almost at a 6, I believe. The ERA is like 5 point something. I think what will help is obviously Mel Stoudemire. I think you bring in a guy not only with another year of control, as you mentioned, Joe, but a guy who's been a closer before with the Orioles. He's faced the Yankees. He's faced all these really good teams in that very competitive AL East. He was an all-star last season. That's the one thing we really do have to remember. He was an all-star pitcher for the Orioles, and hopefully, in a pitcher-friendly environment like Miami, this is somewhere that I guess you could kind of lower that ERA, lower that FIP. And I think it's a nice addition by Miami. Dylan Floro, you could definitely make the case he was getting a little bit unlucky, especially throughout the second, since, after his first month of April. You look at, stats, and Dylan Floro's, I believe his FIP was like a 2.4 something. It was pretty damn low. And that's where you kind of like, you're trying to expire a deal for kind of another contract there, and a guy that could lock you innings, and especially in high leverage situations. I know Lopez is very well known for that, especially last season with the Orioles when he was there. And you get a guy who either is going to really lock it down for you in high leverage, or he's going to shit the bed, as we could say here. And I think that's how it kind of goes with Lopez. I don't know if you want to add anything, Isaac.
Well, it's interesting. I find it interesting because the Twins are like in first place. It's like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like,
it was such a weird trade.
Why are you making big league for big league? Because it's kind of a wash. I mean, you can make arguments for both, but so it's interesting in that regard. I think there's a backstory I'll tell you guys at the ballpark later. There's some other stuff going on. So
yeah, because that 2022 season that he was an All-Star seems to be easily by far the greatest season of his career, and the rest of them just haven't been as great. It was a year that he struck out more than a batter an inning, and he just hasn't been able to do that consistently. Obviously this year, hopefully the stuff is still there from what we've seen, but if you look at that, savant page of his, it's a lot more blue than one. And as our great Luis Adio Weiss did a good job of diving into, Dylan Floro was an extremely unlucky pitcher, and who was really, really just a dependable guy, like Joe said. But
yeah, you trust him. You trust Floro. Right. It doesn't mean he comes through every time, but you trust him.
Exactly. But I think a great 3 years for Dylan Floro with the Marlins organization. And yeah, he pitched a lot of meaningful games, made a lot. I think it was 37 total saves, if I remember from last night's Jeopardy. So all in all, thank you, Dylan Floro. And another rumor that surfaced last night, before Carlos Santana got dealt to Milwaukee, there was a rumor that Miami was one of the final teams interested in this player, which, I think we all agreed at Fish on First, that was a very weird fit, considering he's first base only at this stage of his career. You have Garrett Cooper, Yuli Gurriel really splitting time there at this stage. Joe, what do you make of that? What have you heard regarding first base and players like Santana, Candelario, et cetera?
There's stuff I'm not at liberty to say, but I'm going to just tell you guys, they are looking at a lot of players, as all these teams are. But they're looking at a lot of players that would surprise you, and they're a big name in both leagues.
We'll talk later.
So they've had their. It does. And to be honest, I don't think they're going to get Tim Anderson. That doesn't mean
Thank
they
God.
won't. But I will throw this. I would go after Luis Robert if I were them, and this is an interesting one because moving forward now that they got a reliever, obviously they're also looking at a ton of like starting pitching like that they think is attainable, and Detroit has a couple of them. I don't think we're going to see them in the Marlins series, but I think the usual suspects are pretty widely known that could be moved. I think a Jordan Montgomery could be someone the Marlins could be interested in as well, but from a hitting standpoint, to attain this, I don't see how the Marlins are going to do it unless they trade off their big league roster, which raises this, and I'm not advocating this because he's one of my favorite players, but where's Jazz's future with this team, or where's his position right now? He hasn't been on the field. They've been pretty much winning, and center field is not, we spoke about that. I wasn't crazy about him going there. And Luis Arraez is the second baseman, and it doesn't look like Jazz is the shortstop. Would you do a package that moved Jazz for Luis Robert, and this is just for entertainment purposes. It's not anything I heard. And if Jazz is listening, I'm not necessarily condoning. I'm just putting, if I'm a GM and I'm looking at all angles, do you move a Jazz, for, a piece that, you feel is a better fit for that position? And another guy too, you almost have to ask yourself, Garrett Cooper is on an expiring contract and he hasn't been on the field as consistently. So if you're looking at, Carlos Santana, and there are others they were looking at that play first base as well, are you ready to move, let's say, Coop, for maybe a rental type thing, a guy that plays another position? These are just what I think has to be going on. These conversations have to be going on because the Marlins farm system isn't great. The fact that they traded at the lower levels isn't surprising to me because that seems to be where they got some players, and those are also the furthest away for a regime that's in a win now mode. So you're not really Jake Eater. We like to throw the name around, but he's coming off TJ surgery, and I like him a lot. But they're still, I don't think you're necessarily going to get. Maybe they do. Again, a lot can happen between now and August 1. But I think that you have to look at two avenues, and they just did the lower levels, the real lower levels, to get Robertson. Do they move off the big league roster for something that gets them an immediate help, but in the process you're moving somebody? So just your thoughts on that, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I will say with Cooper, since the start of the season, I told myself, man, I mean, if they're in it, will they really trade Cooper? And then I was telling Isaac and Eli before, I was like, if they were in it, I would see teams still calling in on Cooper no matter what, given the fact that he's on an expiring deal. He's probably not going to return to Miami. And you could probably find a better first baseman out there on the market. There's probably a couple guys, and I can't think of one at the top of my head, that are probably better than Garrett Cooper right now that you would like to bring in Miami. And then the Jazz point you make, you're not wrong. I mean, you're not wrong at all on that one. I think you're completely right. But I think, if you're able to get someone like Luis Robert, as you mentioned, Joe, man, I think you do consider giving up Jazz, because you would bring in a guy who's probably one of the AL MVP contenders. Obviously, it's going to be Shohei, but someone who's going to get a lot of traction with votes, and he's going to finish probably in the top 7, top 5 of MVP voting. That's the type of player you would bring in if you, with Luis Robert, and he's someone who could also play center field. So I think that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think everything has to be on the table. And, it gets to your point, and I get it. You guys do great legwork on these younger guys and are really kind of getting a feel for them, and that's all well and good. But I just don't, outside of Yuri, there's really no untouchable in this. Obviously, on the big league roster, you're not moving Sandy or anything, but you have to, if you want to get there to, because right now, this might be it. This year, next year, let's say, might be the window. Mm-hmm. There's a lot on the line. Obviously, the Marlins were looking to capitalize on the World Baseball Classic. We know Kim's situation with the 1 year, and Skip's really 2 years. So it's like there's a lot of urgency to win now, and you can't let anything hold you back. It's 03 wasn't supposed to be there, and I obviously covered that. And it was like, oh, they're not supposed to be there. And then the more you look, and you're like, well, they're not supposed to be there, but they're still there. And and then they early on detected that, and this, I'll give this quick story. We were in Chicago playing the Cubs in a doubleheader, and it was probably, I think it was late June, and Carl Pavano's facing, I believe, Kerry Wood, and beating him like 2-1 and going into like the 8th inning-ish. And Pavano's pitching great, but Jack sends him out for the 8th inning when already he was pretty taxed. And it was like one of those typical, like single, double, or Ramos Ramirez double and a Moises Alou homer or something like that. Next thing you know, the Marlins are like down like 4-3 or whatever the score was, and they lose the game. And I asked Jack afterward about Pavano. I was like, Jack, I mean, Pavano was already kind of, your thoughts on sending him out for the 8th inning. And he goes, And he didn't say, he said it to like making a statement. He wasn't yelling at me for asking the question. He said, I felt Pavano at 70%, whatever the percentage he thought he was, at that point of the game was better than my best bullpen piece. So he felt 70% of Pavano was worth going with over. Well, what Jack, maybe he intentionally did, but what he basically said was they had Braden Looper as the closer, and before I think it was July 3rd, they traded for Ugueth Urbina, and they made the move early, and Urbina was clearly a rental, but the top reliever on the market, and all the big names were in on Urbina. And yes, they got rid of Adrian Gonzalez, who had a very good career, but they won the World Series. And I'm not sure there's Lone Depot Park if the Marlins don't win that second World Series. I really think that was a transformational, because the Marlins were looking for a stadium at that time, and we're always we won the World Series in '97, and then elected officials could be like fluke year, but now they had two.
Right.
Two with two different ownerships, and you could say this is what it can look like. So if you're going to build fans, if you're going to kind of make August and September and bump heads with football, this is the year to do it. And so if you got to move somebody off that big league roster to get you that piece, you got to think about it. You can't just play for 24, 25, because we don't know what it's going to look like in 24, 25.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, you mentioned Jazz Chisholm, and you're not the first person to mention Jazz Chisholm in possible trade scenarios. And I think the team has to consider it. I don't think the team is enamored with the way this player has gone the last 3 years. Obviously, he's been hurt a lot of the time, and there's been a couple of big names out there in the major leagues. Some on the Padres, some on the White Sox, like you just mentioned, Luis Robert. That Jazz would have to be probably the centerpiece. And if I'm the Marlins, I think you got to do it. This player has shown an inability to stay on the field. And I think sometimes it gets to his head a little bit. I don't know your thoughts on this particular player, Joe.
Jazz he's one of the most unique players I've ever covered. And I like him in so many ways. And even I love Zach Gallen. I love Jazz Chisholm. I feel I have a good rapport with both players. And it's just it was an interesting trade then. And now it's like, look, the sky's the limit with him. There's no doubt his talent is immense. I love his confidence and everything that he brings to the table. I feel right now, and I'm making this claim mainly because I don't know where his position is, because his position was second base. He was voted as a starting all-star second baseman. Yep. But you got Luis Ariz, who shouldn't be at first. He's fine at second. So it's like, what did they do? And you don't just say, okay, now you're my shortstop. Why don't you do that this year? However it went down, their versions, we'll take everyone's word for it. But they really didn't address center field. And then at the last minute, Jazz says he'll play it. And now, was the turf toe? Look, guys get hurt. But when you're not when you don't have all the years and all the reps there, center fielders get accustomed to how many stabs to the field for the ballpark, when they can slow down, when they, when are you just going to fly into the wall trying to make a heroic play? All that stuff, all the instincts that go into play in the position. This is the big leagues. It's not just, you're on a high school field or college field. This is, you want to win, I wasn't a big fan of that move, and hats off to Jazz for doing it. And right now, it's not about even second guessing. It is, where does Jazz come back to play?
Right, and you have Jazz coming and Avi Garcia. I don't know where you have Brian De La Cruz, probably one of your most consistent hitters. You have Jesus Sanchez, who just really seems to come up with that big hit most of the time. I don't know where you fit all these guys. There really is no way, especially without giving someone away from your major league roster. They don't all fit, and I don't know what you guys would do about it.
Would it surprise you guys if Miami traded an outfielder? Maybe De La Cruz? You sell high? I think we were talking about this, Isaac. You sell high on De La Cruz and you bring in another big bat into the order. I mean, Avi Garcia is not a big deal, and he's going to have to come back pretty soon. And you could probably send down Hampson and put back Jazz in the lineup and put him at center.
Well, that would be
That's
obviously, Kevin. That's where he would go. But is that the best fit? You know what I mean?
no.
So
In that case, no.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess until these guys do come back, we won't have to worry about it too much. Jazz hasn't started a rehab assignment yet, but Avi Garcia is on the cusp of returning. He might be even in the clubhouse today. We don't know. Well, Kevin and I will know when we arrive around 2:33. Big Miguel Cabrera press conference. The other part of the team that I think needs to be upgraded is the starting pitching. Cueto did come back and give them 6 miraculous innings. I think against all odds he did that. Joe, what are your thoughts on starting pitching? They did do these 2 bullpen moves. They haven't already come back.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. But I do want to say that the name, and I'm really surprised he isn't here yet, and meaning that they didn't pull the trade off because you guys have thrown it out. But the Candelario trade with Washington, his name had been at the forefront for a while, and there were some people that were thinking that trade was going to happen 3 weeks ago. So keep an eye on that, for third base. So that would be something I didn't want to, lead the podcast without noting that. Starting pitching, it's really fascinating because Edward Cabrera is a wild card right now.
Yep.
This is really what complicates it for the Marlins because, hats off to Johnny Cueto to being the veteran he is, to do what he's done. And, I know it's only a couple of appearances, but if Cabrera is going to be 2-3 innings in the blister or is the shoulder completely right, it really puts them in that bind that they're, that's where, why they, as much as they need a bat, they need an arm, but I could flip it again too. What if you move Jazz for a, controllable starting pitching? You could do him as well. It could all go into there. So I think they've kind of are making, normally at the trade deadline, you're one thing away. You're not normally, we need a shortstop still, we need a center fielder still, we need a third baseman, first baseman, catcher, a starting pitcher. That's when you ask me what went right. It's like there's nothing really that adds up that they're there. So you don't usually do your entire off-season needs at the trade deadline. Usually you get that one guy or 2 guys, and that's it. So, I mean, like I mentioned, Montgomery, I think he would be a good fit, but there are others out there as well. You want to go the rental route, or if you want controllable, that's the point. If you want a controllable guy, then I think that's where you're looking at throwing Jazz's name in the hat. Is the control? It's not the rentals.
No. Do you think this current rotation, and obviously we could even add Yuri in there at some point? I mean, I guess replacing Cueto already. Do you think it's sustainable what they could do with this current rotation right now? I mean,
they just haven't logged these innings, Kevin. That's the thing. There's no real track. They traded Pablo, who gave him a lot of innings last year for Pablo. And isn't Pablo like leading the American League in strikeouts or something? This is where, as much as I love having Luis Arraez, this is where that hurt. And this is my apprehension about making those kind of trades and just assuming we got pitching surplus. And again, Yuri, I wouldn't have sent him down, to be honest with you. Now, I'm not looking at all the service time, and I don't want to be that cynical. But I haven't read the CBA as closely as I would have if I was still day to day. But then the issue isn't that Yuri wasn't going to at some point have to be monitored or certainly have his innings curbed. I think you create more risk for injury by taking players off of a routine and making up a completely different one. You could have done a lot of different things with just riding him out there and just, if he gives you, we could say innings, but we've seen him have 7 pitch innings, so if he's not having a stressful inning, just ride him out there. Yeah, after 4 innings, okay, he's out of the game. And then if it's mid-August, well, then Yuri helped take you to that spot in mid-August, and then you hit the number. Because I still think a lot of these numbers are pretty much just made up. They're just based on, similar type guys, almost like the arbitration process. Your salary is based on what somebody else did before you. You're a similar comp, but that doesn't mean if you're completely healthy and showing no signs of fatigue and you're dominating big league hitters, what's a 45 pitch performance 3 weeks later at Double-A do for you?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think you could even, if you really do want to limit Yuri, you could still pony him up with someone like Johnny Cueto or Edward Cabrera, where you start with
You
Eddie
make
and
it,
then
yes, bingo.
yeah, that's what they should be doing. And I think Isaac, Eli, and I all disagreed that to call him down, to send him down. They shouldn't have done that at all. And he didn't pitch for like 2 weeks, I'm pretty sure. And now he goes like 2 innings and a third, I believe. It was his last start, and
Yeah.
that's not going to help you right now.
No, and how does that help him? It's like you have some number that I don't know if publicly they said it. Sometimes they'll tell you privately, but is it 140 innings? What's the number? Where's this magic? He can't go any further than. And I disagree entirely that, oh my gosh, Yuri Perez coming out of the bullpen in October. Well, to do what? They can talk about Dontrell did that in 03, but he didn't do it well. He wasn't great in the playoffs as a reliever. I think he had one pretty good outing against San Francisco in the first round, but he wasn't like Dontrell was some dominant, reliever. He may have had 1 inning of work against the Yankees or 2 innings of work, but it's like you're messing with the guy's routine. And again, I don't know, is he a guy who takes a long time to warm up? You could do opener scenarios, or
Right.
you could do that type of stuff. And I think people need to realize the difference between an opener and a bullpen game. And it's exactly what Kevin was saying is you could pair him up with Cueto and have Cueto be the bulk guy that day. So if he has a 5-pitch first inning, he gets the second, give him 30 pitches. And maybe he takes you 2 2/3 or whatever. You probably don't want to start Cueto to start an inning, to come in the middle of the inning. You probably want to start the inning, and then do it that way. There are ways. There's a 26-man roster now. That you can figure this stuff out and keep him on a schedule that's not don't throw or whatever. I get it. And trust me, it's like the Marlins aren't the only team. Pretty much 29 other teams have done the same thing. But I just say, it's like, why? You're just creating something to, if you ran him out there and he got hurt, everyone would be running you out of town. But now if he gets hurt, you'll get a pass because, well, we try to control his innings better instead of, and maybe that's the McKeon and me seeing, he didn't act that way with Dontrell in 03. Dontrell pitched until he got real tired and fatigued, and it wasn't just the same at the end. But he'll take that World Series ring, knowing Dontrell. He's very happy having that. So you ride this. We're putting the limits on the kid. We're putting the limits on him. Who's to say he can't put his own limits on himself?
Right. Well, Joe, you tell me, did the team get a pass in 2014 when they were so careful with Jose in 2013? So careful, more careful than I've ever seen a team be with a pitcher. And he gets Tommy John anyway in 2014. Did they get a pass that year too?
No, that just brought so much frustration to like the Mike Redmonds of the world, because Redmond ultimately loses his job, and he in 13 had a baby him the whole time, and then he's like he got hurt anyway,
Exactly.
and why does he get hurt? When you're throwing that many hard sliders and that nasty and throwing that hard all the time, and guys get hurt. You just can't predict it. You can't. All I know is if you could see red flags. You could see does Yuri look like he's tiring? Is there a drop in velo? Is his arm slot dropping? There's so many signs that tell you a guy is in trouble. As far as I saw and heard, Yuri had shown none. It was just which makes you think, is it a service time thing? But again, it's like if you're going to extend them anyway, that Super 2 status really doesn't come in. A lot of times that doesn't come into play. But it's just my opinion. I just think I've seen a lot of it, and there are people I'm sure completely disagree, but I kind of have that Johnny saying more injuries with inactivity than activity. And that doesn't mean recklessness. That doesn't mean, butchering the guy, keeping him out there for a 40-pitch inning and when he's stressed out. There's so much I think you could have done with a talent like Yuri Perez to keep him here. And think of what, again, I'm anticipating what David Robertson brings is this new energy, because along the way in a long season, you need new energy, players to come in and outsiders to come in, kind of pick you up for a little bit. The spark with Yuri going every fifth day and Sandy being on track, and hopefully, and then it's like, okay, now that confidence, now they're coming on the field and the other team is looking like, we ain't scoring tonight, and so again, it's like that stuff matters. There's a lot of psychological stuff that goes on in a baseball field and the players kind of know it. And I just thought, again, I wouldn't have handled it that way, but that's not to say what they did was wrong, because 29 other teams probably would have done the same thing.
Joe, I do want to ask about Candelario. I'm glad you mentioned him, because I believe the report is now that they're shifting to Candelario after going for Carlos Santana. Just what have you heard on that front, and how much do you think Miami would have to give up for someone like Candelario, who, I mean, when you bring him in, you're going to kind of, you kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't say platoon, but it would give Gene Segura some more rest. And I believe Candelario could play first if need be, and if you do decide to move on from someone like Garrett Cooper. But I would prefer him at third, I would assume.
Yeah, it just, most of the names, at least early on, that I've heard is third base. It's like they're looking at third base, and then they're looking at other first basemen. So if he and what he's hits lefty or switch hits, there's so many players. Candelario
switch hits.
Switch hits, yeah. So you get a guy like that. He's got some pop, So I think that his name has just been out there, and you just keep hearing it. That I think sometimes we tend to hear something that doesn't get done, and then like 3 weeks later we have 14 other new rumors we're following, and then the deal that gets done is the one that was in the works 3 weeks ago. So again, I wouldn't be shocked if he's ultimately the move. Now, what do you give up for? How much control does he have?
1 year deal, I believe.
Yeah, 1 year deal.
Yeah,
so
one year deal.
You're not giving up as much, So you're probably giving him an arm. You're probably giving him, a double-A arm.
Right.
Pat Monteverde.
Yeah, I guess the only worry with Miami is that I'm sure every single contender that there is, and there are a lot of them this year, quote unquote, that would love to have this player. Does Miami have enough assets to outbid all those other teams?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't trade Monteverde, but again, really? I wouldn't trade him. No, I hear too much good about him.
Arms.
Yeah, and this kid's pretty good. He's lefty and he's really good. But they're, I don't know. Do you move Eater and somebody else? You could go that route.
Rental.
Right. But again, we're talking rentals, but we're talking. You're talking about potentially an opportunity to have a very, very special transformational moment in the future of this franchise. Because what's the alternative? It all falls apart, and then everyone forgets about him in September. That's not exactly. I've lived through many of those.
Yeah, like Carlos Lee.
Yeah.
With Monteverde, Joe, are you a little surprised he's not up by now? I mean, the guy's been dominant. I believe he was a 2018 draft pick, and now's when they're promoting him to AAA. They did it, I believe, this week. And they need arms. They really do.
Was he a little dinged up though? Didn't he have a little? He was in the futures game, right?
Yeah.
Was he a little sore or something like that? It might have been. I thought he might have had something. I might be wrong, but you don't need a rush. That's the thing. I'm not. Double A is fine. Double A, Triple A, it doesn't really matter to me. You're facing quality players. You're again back to what I was saying. Maybe you like the. What he's doing there, the environment, whatever. Maybe you're trying to win a little bit, and you have a chance to, get some people in the farm system, pay raises because they win a division or whatever. There's a lot that goes into it, and I don't think that I don't. As far as I've heard, they've done nothing. Would I say anything I would have done differently with Monteverde? Just think he's fine. He's just going to need time, but once he gets there, I think he's going to be a pretty good pitcher for them.
Yeah. I think he's going to eat a lot of valuable innings late in this season. And, if so, maybe even in the postseason, I think he's going to be a really valuable asset for this team. I think he's more valuable to the Marlins than he would be in a trade to another team. So I think that's the right way to go. Joe, we want to finish up with you. We don't want to take up too much of your time. Last thing I'm going to ask you is, hey, it's Miguel Cabrera Appreciation Weekend. He comes back to South Florida. First ballot Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. 3,000 hits, 600. Is it 600 home runs already?
500.
500 home
500
runs, doubles. Yeah. And wow, probably one of the best players to ever put on a Marlins uniform. Joe, just if you want to share your favorite memories of covering this player and maybe what went down with the trade.
He's the best player to ever put the uniform on, I think. I think if you're just going to base it on WAR, something like that, Stanton's been the greatest Marlin if you're going to do what the accomplishments, home runs, and all the other stuff. But Miggy's the most talented, is arguably the most talented right-handed hitter of the last since 2000. Certainly, I mean, I know Pujols and Manny Ramirez and Mike Trout and all those, but this is in terms of pure hitter, man. He's the memories. Remember seeing him in spring training in 2002, my first year on the beat for MLB.com, and then certainly the call up in 2003. His first hit being a walk-off home run in extra innings. I don't think people remember, but Jack hit him ninth.
Yeah.
He was hitting ninth in the lineup that day. Other memories, obviously the World Series home run off Roger Clemens. I will say is something, this is what I loved about Jack McKeon. The Marlins were playing at Philly coming out of the All-Star break. And in 2003, and Miggy had a good series, and Jim Tomei was with the Phillies that year, and the Marlins, I think they lost 2 of 3, I think, in that series, and they had some bad luck. Maybe I'm getting my dates wrong. It might have been August, and Tomei had like some big hits for Philly, and the Marlins were scuffling a little bit, and then I said, right now I said to Jack pregame, just in our BS session after he had talked and we were just talking, I was like, it's like, you guys right now, you're not having what Tomei's giving you. That guy is getting a big hit. And then we go into Atlanta and Miggy hits some extra inning game. He hits this really clutch 2-run double or 2-run home or something like that to ice the game and win at Turner Field, a big, big game, to keep them afloat in the wild card standings. And McKeon after the game goes, Cabrera, he's our Jim Tomei. It's like he's giving me a little a kudos for mentioning something about Tomei, and he kind of gave me that little. But it was funny to hear McKeon say that. The other memory is when they're playing that several years later at Baltimore when they tried to intentionally walk him in extra innings, and he reached over and got a single because the pitcher, whoever it was at the time, didn't throw the pitch wide enough, and Miggy just with the most relaxed swing, looked like a softball player, just swatted it over to into short center field and knocked in the game-winning hit. There's really nothing he couldn't do with a baseball bat, and just I said this after Jose Fernandez died, that of all the years up until that point, and maybe still true, I don't know if they're the two players I covered as Marlins who I felt enjoyed playing baseball maybe more than anybody that I covered were Jose Fernandez and Miguel Cabrera. They just loved playing baseball, and Miguel didn't care if he never wanted to come out of games. He day games after night games. Some days he was maybe drank a little too much the night before, but his love for baseball, and I think Luis Ariz has a lot of that. I think Jazz has a lot of that, but just guys that just completely love playing baseball, and it's great for him to be a Hall of Famer. It's kind of what could have been if he had stayed in Miami, obviously. There's a lot of people that knew when they traded him that they were trading a future Hall of Famer, and it was a very hard day, and obviously the trade didn't pan out. But having Miguel Cabrera come back here will be interesting to see how many people are there tonight, and the crowd reaction to him, which I'm sure will be special. And just a special, generational player. And, I'm proud to say, and by then I'll have my 10 years in the BBWA. I'll be very happy to cast a vote for Miguel Cabrera as a Hall of Famer. I'm looking forward to that day.
Yeah, a very special place in all of our hearts. Can't wait to talk to him. He's going to apparently be at a big press conference today around 3 p.m. Lone Depot Park. It's July 28th. Kevin, if there's not anything else on your end, I think we can send this off.
Yeah, I think we're good. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you at the ballpark very soon to kick off Miguel Cabrera weekend. 2 days of ceremony. I believe they're not doing anything on Sunday. So for the ones watching, I believe this will drop on Saturday. If it drops on Friday, well, get out to the ballpark Saturday. Get out to the ballpark Venezuelan Heritage Day as well on Saturday. So highly recommend you all to go out there, and should be a good time. So yeah.
Yes. Thanks again, Joe. Joe, anything from you?
No, just thanks for having me on, and kudos to you guys and to Eli for doing something on your own and trying to build something. I have a lot of respect for that as someone now in this stage of my career, as I'm building at least 2 companies, and it's not easy, but it can be potentially very rewarding. So kudos to you guys, and all the best with the podcast. Thanks for having me on, and see you guys later.
Yeah, we appreciate it. It is Fish on first and it's man on second. We just got to get someone on third, right? Alrighty, for Kevin, for Joe Frisaro, for myself, thank you all, and as always, go Fish.